The night had settled in thick and heavy by the time Mark Johnson hit the interstate. It was early November in rural Pennsylvania, and the cold had just begun to nip at the edges of the fading autumn. Mark was on his way back home from a weekend visit with family, the sky above a seamless blanket of black stars hidden behind dense clouds. The interstate was mostly empty, save for the occasional rig truck rumbling past or the distant headlights of a car in the far distance. Mark preferred driving at night. There was something about the solitude of the empty road, the way the world seemed to shrink to just the ribbon of pavement illuminated by his headlights. It was the only time he could really think, decompress after long days at work, and enjoy a quiet moment to himself. Tonight, though, was different. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 11:47 p.m. The radio played a low, scratchy country tune, the kind that felt nostalgic but a little sad. Mark's mind wandered back to the small town he'd just left behind, the crunch of fallen leaves underfoot, the cold bite of the wind, the worn faces of his relatives. But as the miles ticked by, that comfortable feeling slipped away, replaced by a gnawing unease he couldn't quite place. He shook his head and tapped the steering wheel lightly, trying to clear the fog of fatigue and creeping anxiety. The highway stretched on, 2 lanes each way, divided by a narrow median lined with a few skeletal trees, their branches creaking softly in the wind. About 20 miles past the last rest stop, Mark's headlights caught something on the right side of the road. A man was standing by the shoulder, motionless. Mark's first thought was that the guy must be hitchhiking, which was rare on these roads, but not impossible. As Mark slowed his truck, the man turned slowly, facing the highway. His clothes were dark, blending with the shadows, but Mark could make out the outline of a worn jacket and jeans. His face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light. Mark called out, "Hey, you need a ride?" The man didn't respond. He didn't move. Mark frowned and eased forward, his windshield wipers flicking once in the light drizzle that had just started to fall. The man's eyes seemed hollow, and there was something about his stillness that made Mark's skin crawl. Mark accelerated, deciding not to stop. Something about the whole scene felt wrong. The rain intensified, droplets pattering on the windshield in a rhythmic beat. The highway glistened wet under the headlights, and Mark flicked his wipers faster. His phone buzzed with a message, but when he glanced down, there was no signal, just no service. The road ahead curved sharply to the left, and as Mark rounded the bend, something made him slam on the brakes. Right in the middle of his lane stood a woman. She was wearing a white dress, soaked and clinging to her frame. Her long, dark hair was plastered against her face. She looked toward Mark's headlights with eyes that reflected the light unnaturally, almost glowing. Mark's heart pounded. He honked the horn twice and flashed his high beams, but the woman didn't move. She just stood there, as if frozen in time. His mind screamed at him to keep driving, but his foot was planted hard on the brake. The truck skidded slightly on the wet asphalt as Mark tried to swerve right. The woman disappeared in an instant, as if vanishing into thin air. Mark's breath came in short bursts, his hands trembling on the wheel. He kept driving, but his speed was slower now, the road feeling endless and oppressive. Another mile down the highway, Mark saw a car parked on the shoulder with its hazards blinking faintly in the rain. No one was around. He pulled up cautiously and noticed the car's doors were locked, but the engine was cold, as if it had been abandoned. Mark's unease deepened. He glanced back at the road and out of the corner of his eye saw a figure standing under a street lamp, ahead. The light was flickering, making it hard to see the person's features, but the figure was small, hunched over, almost as if searching the ground. Mark shook his head and told himself to keep moving. He flipped on the high beams and passed the figure, but the moment his headlights swept past, the figure was gone. Suddenly, the radio sparked to life with static and a distorted voice cutting through. It was faint but unmistakable, words dripping with despair. "Don't look back." Mark slammed on the brakes again, the truck jerking violently. The voice faded, replaced by silence. His phone buzzed once more. No service. A flicker of headlights appeared behind him, far off but getting closer. Mark felt a flicker of hope. Another car meant another person. Maybe help. But the car was coming fast, way too fast for this stretch of wet highway. As it drew nearer, Mark noticed something was off. The headlights weren't two distinct beams, but a single, blinding white glow that seemed to ripple and pulse. The car passed him, but Mark swore the driver's face was twisted, pale, and distorted in a way that made his stomach turn. The glow lingered behind the truck for a moment longer before fading into the distance. Mark's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. Then the headlights in his rearview mirror vanished. He took a deep breath and pushed the accelerator down, desperate to put miles between himself and the strange figure. The rain turned into a heavy downpour, windshield wipers scraping furiously. Then, just as quickly, the rain stopped. The road ahead was slick but clear. Mark looked at the clock. It was 1:13 a.m. He was nearly home. As he neared the outskirts of a small town, the headlights of other vehicles began to appear again. Mark exhaled, tension easing. He noticed a sign for a diner just off the highway and decided to stop for a coffee. Inside, the warm lights and smell of fresh coffee calmed him further. He told the waitress about the strange figures and the eerie car on the highway. She nodded, her expression grim. "You're lucky to be here," she said quietly. "There's been stories about this stretch of road for decades." Mark raised an eyebrow. "The locals call it the Whispering Mile. Does people say strange things happen here after dark? Ghosts, phantom hitchhikers, even lost souls trapped on the road." Mark shivered despite the warmth of the diner. "Is it real?" he asked. She shrugged. "You can decide. Just remember, if you see someone on the road after midnight, it's best not to stop." Mark finished his coffee and thanked her. Back in his truck, the rain started again, light and steady. As he drove away, the headlights catching the empty highway, Mark kept his eyes peeled, heart pounding with the memory of the woman in white and the glowing car. Whatever haunted the Whispering Mile, Mark knew one thing for sure. He would never drive that road again after dark. Story the end. The night air was thick with a damp chill as I pulled out of my friend's driveway just after midnight, leaving downtown Louisville behind me. The plan was simple. Drive the 90 miles back home to a small town nestled in the foothills of Kentucky's rolling hills. The road I'd take was familiar but unforgiving after dark, a narrow two-lane that sliced through dense woods and patches of farmland. I'd done this drive countless times before, but that night, something about the road felt off, like the darkness itself was watching. I had spent the evening catching up with an old friend I hadn't seen in years. Conversation flowed easily, laughter spilled into the night air, and before I knew it, the clock was screaming at me. 12:15 a.m. I was tired, but the thought of a warm bed waiting at home pushed me forward. The headlights cut through the blackness as I merged onto Highway 150, the familiar hum of the engine filling the silence inside the car. I rolled down the windows a crack to keep the night air fresh. The radio was off. I preferred the quiet, just the rhythm of the tires on the asphalt and the occasional hoot of an owl somewhere deep in the trees. The first stretch of the drive was uneventful. Straight roads flanked by fields now barren and brown from the late autumn chill. After about 20 minutes, the road narrowed and began to curve, the trees arching overhead like silent sentinels. The moon, nearly full, cast pale light that shimmered through the branches, but the woods were dense, and shadows clung to the edges of my vision. I was about halfway through when I noticed the headlights behind me. At first, it was just a car that had appeared suddenly in the rearview mirror, but as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that it wasn't passing me. The car stayed back, its lights unwavering and too close for comfort on this winding road. I glanced down at my speedometer, 55 miles per hour, well within the limit. The driver behind me matched my pace perfectly. I tried to brush off the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe they had the same destination, or maybe they were just cautious on the narrow roads. Still, I could feel the tension knotting in my chest. I flicked the headlights from low to high, then back again, a subtle signal that maybe it was time to pass or back off, but the car didn't react. I took a deep breath and focused on the road. After the next curve, I found a turnout, a small gravel area big enough for a single car. I eased onto it, pulling my car as far off the asphalt as I could. The vehicle behind me didn't slow down. It just kept rolling past the turnout, lights still on, disappearing around the next bend. I sat there for a moment, hands tight on the wheel, heart pounding, before deciding to continue. As I merged back onto the road, I noticed something strange. The car was gone. No headlights anywhere behind me. I exhaled, but my relief was short-lived. Minutes later, as I approached a long straight stretch flanked by forest on both sides, the headlights reappeared, suddenly much closer this time. So close I could almost count the brake lights, but there was no traffic ahead for miles. The taillights blinked once, then twice, rapidly like a warning. My stomach dropped. I tapped the brakes lightly, and the lights mirrored the movement, stopping when I stopped, slowing when I slowed. Panic clawed at my throat. I considered speeding up, but knew that on this stretch, that would be reckless. Instead, I decided to take the next exit, hoping to lose whoever was behind me. The exit sign showed a small town just off the highway, about 2 miles down the road. As I slowed to take the exit, the car behind me maintained speed, now dangerously close to my bumper. The brake lights flashed furiously. I tapped my horn, hoping to signal them to back off, but they didn't respond. Heart hammering, I glanced to the side, hoping to see the driver's face, but the windows were tinted, and the driver remained hidden in shadow. I decided to pull into the town's only open gas station, the flickering neon sign, the only light in a place that felt frozen in time. I slowed, turning into the station, but as I did, I noticed the car behind me made no move to follow. The lights vanished. Inside the gas station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering intermittently. I grabbed a pack of bottled water, trying to steady my breathing. I looked out the window, half expecting to see the car lurking in the shadows, but the parking lot was empty. The clerk, an older man with tired eyes, noticed my nervous demeanor but said nothing. I paid quickly and stepped outside. The cold air hit me sharply. My headlights reflected off the wet pavement. Mist had started to roll in. I got back into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The road ahead was slick. As I pulled out of the gas station, the town was eerily quiet, the only sound the swish of my tires on the wet asphalt. Back on the highway, the fog grew thicker, obscuring the line markings and swallowing the trees. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the road ahead, a woman standing perfectly still, dressed in a long white nightgown, her hair tangled and hanging over her face. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the wet surface. My heart froze as the figure remained motionless. I called out through the window, but she didn't respond. The fog wrapped around her like a veil. Then, without warning, she vanished, just disappeared into the mist. The air grew colder, and a shiver ran down my spine. I didn't dare stop again. Minutes later, I finally saw the welcome sign to my town, the lights of home beckoning like a beacon. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't bother unlocking the car properly. I ran inside, bolted the door, and sat in the dark, trying to calm my racing mind. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the passenger side door, smudged handprints on the window, and the faint scent of damp earth lingering inside the car. I never told anyone about that night, but I haven't driven that road after dark since. Story the end. The night had a strange stillness about it the moment Carter Evans pulled out of the Walmart parking lot in rural West Virginia. The clock on his dashboard blinked 11:43 p.m., and the stretch of road ahead was the 2-lane highway that cut through the thick Appalachian woods between his hometown of Beckley and the next city, Charleston. It was a drive he'd made hundreds of times, usually with friends or on the way to a late-night shift at the plant. But tonight he was alone. Carter's workday had been longer than usual, and a sense of exhaustion weighed on him. The last thing he wanted was to be out on the road, but he had promised his girlfriend he'd pick up some things from Charleston before Sunday. Now, with the truck loaded, he was committed. The headlights sliced through the dark as he settled into the driver's seat, the worn steering wheel cold beneath his fingers. The radio was set to a classic rock station, but static had been creeping in lately, so he flicked it off and rolled down the window to let the cool night air in. The smell of pine and damp earth filled the cabin. The highway was deserted, save for the occasional deer crossing sign blinking in the reflection of his headlights. The trees loomed on either side like silent sentinels. Somewhere up ahead, he noticed a faint glow. Taillights from a car, perhaps a few hundred yards away. As he closed the distance, Carter noticed something odd. The car was parked at the shoulder, hazard lights flashing, no movement inside. His first thought was someone might be stranded, needing help. The temperature outside had dropped sharply. the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. He slowed the truck to a crawl, peering at the car. There was no one visible. The driver's door was slightly ajar, the interior dark. Carter debated whether to stop, his mind wrestling with the late hour and the rumors he'd heard about this stretch of road. His father's voice echoed in his head, warning him to be careful. You never know who's out there after dark. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing but the endless black ribbon of road behind him. Finally, curiosity got the better of him. He pulled over, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Carter stepped out into the cold, the gravel crunching under his boots. The air was thick with an almost unnatural stillness. He approached the car cautiously, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning. The driver's door creaked open wider in a sudden gust of wind, revealing an empty seat. There was a faint scent of perfume, floral but musty, lingering in the air. He called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Only the rustling of leaves answered him. His heartbeat quickened. He leaned inside the car, looking for clues, keys, a phone, anything. On the passenger seat, there was a small folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. "Help me." The words were scrawled hastily, the ink smeared. Carter swallowed hard, a noise behind him, a soft thud. He whipped around but saw nothing except the trees swaying in the night breeze. The hairs on his neck stood up. He turned back to the car to call 911 on his cell, but his phone screen was dead. Panic rose in his chest. He decided to get back in his truck, lock the doors, and call for help from a safer spot. As he moved back, he thought he caught a glimpse of a figure standing just at the edge of the tree line. A woman, pale and thin, wearing a long white dress that fluttered like a ghost in the wind. His breath caught. He blinked. She was gone. Carter jumped into the truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. The radio burst to life with static and a faint voice whispering, "Don't stop." His hands trembled as he shifted gears and pulled back onto the highway. The figure appeared again, now standing in the middle of the road ahead. The headlights revealed a face twisted in sorrow, eyes hollow. Carter slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, but the truck slid on the icy patch and stopped mere inches from her. She raised a hand slowly, pointing behind him. His heart pounded violently. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw headlights speeding toward him fast. The truck roared to life, and Carter slammed the accelerator. The approaching car vanished into the darkness behind him, but the figure stayed, watching as he sped away. He didn't stop until dawn broke over the hills. When he finally reached Charleston, his hands still shook and the morning sun never felt so warm. Carter never spoke about that night, not to friends, not to family. But he never drove that road after dark again, and sometimes when the wind shifts just right, he swears he can still hear the whisper, "Help me." Story the end. The road was empty except for me. I was driving through the back roads of West Virginia, somewhere between Charleston and Beckley. It was late, well past midnight, and the only light came from my headlights, cutting through the thick darkness that surrounded the narrow two-lane highway. The GPS signal had been lost miles ago, and my phone was dead from a day of navigation and music streaming. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. The trip started just after sundown. I'd been visiting family for the weekend and was eager to get home. The drive was supposed to take about 4 hours, but the sun set faster than I expected. Now I was cruising along these winding country roads that seemed to never end, passing dense forests with gnarled trees that reached their skeletal branches toward the sky like claws. My headlights flickered once, briefly, but I shook it off. I'd had this old sedan for years. Its quirks were familiar. I kept the radio playing some classic rock low enough not to be distracting. The road was lonely and straight for now, and I was trying to stay awake and alert. About an hour into the night drive, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the road ahead. It was difficult to see clearly, just a silhouette against the darkness, but it looked like a man. He was motionless, his back turned to the road. His clothes hung loosely, like they were soaked and worn. I slowed down instinctively. As I drew nearer, the man suddenly turned his head slowly to look straight at me. His face was pale and gaunt, eyes wide and dark, almost too large. His mouth opened slightly as if to say something, but no sound came out. A chill ran down my spine. Before I could react, he stepped into the road. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, tires screeching against the pavement. My car came to a stop just a few feet from him. He didn't flinch. I rolled down my window, trying to catch my breath. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't respond, just stared with those unblinking eyes. Then slowly he raised a pale hand and pointed behind me. I looked back down the road. Nothing. No cars. No lights. When I glanced back, he was gone. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I slammed the gas and sped off. I kept telling myself it was just a trick of the night, exhaustion messing with my mind. Maybe the shadow of a tree, a deer, anything but what I saw. About 20 minutes later, I saw something else. A car, parked on the shoulder ahead with its hazard lights blinking faintly. The make and model looked old, maybe from the 80s or early 90s. Its paint was faded, rusted in spots. The driver's door was wide open. As I passed slowly, I peered inside the car. No one there. The engine was cold. No signs of life. It was parked awkwardly, as if the driver left in a hurry. My stomach twisted. I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw headlights flicker in the distance, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. I passed the old car and kept going. The trees closed in tighter, their branches scratching against the windows in the breeze. The night felt heavier, darker. My radio crackled suddenly and went silent. I fiddled with the knob. No luck. A faint whisper came through the speakers. I leaned in, straining to hear. "Don't stop." The voice was low, urgent, but impossible to place. I hit the power button, but the whispering didn't stop. It seemed to echo all around the car. I tried to tell myself it was static, a prank of the old radio. Suddenly, the headlights flickered again and went out. The car coasted to a stop in complete darkness. My heart hammered as I fumbled for my phone. No signal. I turned on the interior dome light. There, outside the windshield, I saw them. Figures in the trees. 5, maybe 6. Tall, gaunt, pale faces, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. They stared at me silently. The whispering grew louder. "Don't stop." My breath came in ragged gasps. I slammed my hand on the ignition, but the engine wouldn't start. The figures stepped closer. One reached a skeletal hand toward the car. I locked the doors, my hands trembling. After what felt like an eternity, the engine roared to life. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor and sped down the dark road. The figures vanished into the trees behind me. After several miles, the lights of a small town appeared ahead. I pulled into a gas station, hands shaking. The clerk looked at me oddly when I asked if this road was known for weird happenings. He told me about a stretch of highway nearby known as Widow's Pass. "Many folks avoid driving it after dark," he said. "People say strange things happen there. Cars stall, drivers see ghosts, hear whispers." I nodded silently. I never went back. Sometimes, when driving late, I catch a glimpse of something at the edge of the road, a pale face, a silent figure watching, and I remember that night on Widow's Pass. Story, the end. The road was slick and shimmering under the dull glow of the highway lights. It was just after midnight when Jake Miller rolled out of the gas station on Route 95, about 30 miles north of Richmond, Virginia. He'd been driving for hours, hauling a late-night load of construction materials to a site across the state. The sun had set long ago, and the sprawling highway stretched before him like a dark ribbon swallowed by shadows. Jake was no stranger to night driving. Years behind the wheel of his pickup truck had taught him how to stay sharp, even when fatigue threatened to claim him. But tonight felt different. The kind of different that crawls under your skin and won't let go. The temperature outside hovered around 42 degrees, and the air was damp from a recent rain. Jake could hear the rhythmic thrum of the tires on wet asphalt, the occasional splash from puddles at the roadside. His headlights barely pierced the fog that had started rolling in low and thick, blurring the edges of trees and signposts. The radio was off. No music, no talk shows, just the ambient sound of the road and the truck. Jake preferred it that way, especially when he was driving long stretches alone. It gave him space to think. Tonight, though, his thoughts kept drifting back to the strange feeling he'd had since the gas station attendant's odd warning. "You're headed up that stretch near Crow's Hollow?" the old man had asked, voice rough like gravel. Jake nodded. "Best keep your eyes on the road. Don't stop for anyone. Not after dark." Jake had smiled, chalking it up to local superstition. "Thanks for the tip, but I've been driving that way for years. I'll be fine." The man's eyes didn't smile. "Just be careful." Jake shook it off as he pulled onto the highway. For nearly an hour, nothing unusual happened. The highway was empty except for a couple of distant headlights that quickly disappeared behind hills. The fog thickened, turning the world outside into a vague watercolor painting of muted grays and blacks. Then, about 45 miles in, Jake saw something. A figure standing alone on the shoulder just beyond the guardrail. The shape was tall and thin, wearing a long dark coat that flapped loosely in the cold breeze. The figure didn't move or wave, just stood staring straight ahead. Jake slowed, instinctively squinting to make out the details. His first thought was that someone had broken down, but there was no car nearby. "Hey!" Jake called out, rolling down the window despite the chill. "You need help?" No answer. The figure didn't flinch. Jake's breath fogged the glass as he rolled it back up, and he felt the first real knot of unease twist in his stomach. He thought about stopping, but something inside told him not to. He pressed the gas pedal and pulled away. 2 miles later, his headlights caught another figure, this one a woman, standing by the edge of a narrow creek that ran parallel to the highway. She wore a pale dress, soaked from the mist, and her hair hung heavy over her face. Jake blinked and looked again. She didn't move. He flashed the high beams, hoping to startle her, but she remained still, like a statue carved from stone. "Drive on, Jake," he told himself. "It's probably just someone fishing or a prank." He passed her slowly, eyes glued to the road ahead. Suddenly, his headlights flickered, then dimmed. Jake slammed a hand on the dashboard, trying to reset the lights. The truck's electrical system seemed to glitch. The dashboard lights sputtered and went dark for a split second. The radio crackled to life with static, then a voice whispered, "Don't stop." The truck's lights flickered again. The temperature inside the cab dropped suddenly, breath steaming in Jake's mouth. He swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter. "Keep driving," he muttered. At mile marker 52, the fog became a thick wall, swallowing everything beyond 20 feet. Jake slowed, peering through the mist. The road ahead disappeared. Then, out of the fog, the outline of a car appeared, parked sideways, blocking the lane. Its headlights were off. Jake slammed on the brakes, half skidding to a halt a few feet away. The truck's engine sputtered but stayed running. Jake's heart hammered as he watched the car, then noticed movement inside. A man sat in the driver's seat, head down, shoulders shaking as if crying. Jake tried the horn, but it was silent. "Sir, are you okay?" Jake shouted. No response. Suddenly, the driver raised his head. His face was gaunt, pale as a sheet, eyes hollow and dark. Jake's skin crawled. The figure opened the door and stepped out. Jake instinctively locked the doors. The man began to walk around the truck slowly, never taking his eyes off Jake. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, voice hollow and distant. Jake shook his head, fumbling with the keys, heart racing. "I'm just passing through. I'll call for help." The man smiled, a slow, cruel twist of lips that revealed stained teeth. The truck's engine died with a pop. Jake cursed, turning the key again. Nothing. The man moved closer, his footsteps silent on the wet pavement. Jake reached for his phone, only to find no signal. "Please," Jake said, voice cracking. The man stopped inches from the window, his breath cold on the glass. "Leave before it's too late," he whispered. The fog thickened again, and when Jake blinked, the man was gone. The truck remained dead. Jake's phone buzzed with a message. "Turn back." Panic surged. He tried the engine again. This time, it roared to life. Jake didn't hesitate. He slammed the truck into gear and peeled away, tires spraying water. The fog thinned as he gained speed. When he looked in the rearview mirror, the road was empty. The radio was silent. His heart still pounded as he drove into the first glimmers of dawn. Jake never spoke of that night. He avoided Route 95 whenever he could. But sometimes, on dark, foggy nights, he hears that whisper on the wind, "Don't stop." Story, the end. It was a late October night in 2017 when I found myself driving alone down a stretch of highway I'd never been on before. I had just left a small gathering in a town near Amarillo, Texas, and was making my way back to my apartment in Lubbock. The sky was clear, stars blanketing the dark sky, but the highway ahead seemed endless and unforgiving in the blackness of the night. I'd taken this route based on a suggestion from a coworker who swore it was the quickest way home, though it was a bit more remote than I was used to. As the miles slipped under my tires, I noticed the roadside grew increasingly sparse. Fewer streetlights, fewer buildings, fewer signs of life. The occasional glowing eyes of distant animals caught in the headlights and the silhouette of mesquite trees breaking the horizon were the only markers that I wasn't completely alone. My phone had only a faint signal, which I attributed to the open plains and my distance from the city. I plugged it into the charger but didn't expect much use from it. About an hour into the drive, I began to feel a creeping unease. There was a car behind me, its headlights following closely. At first, I thought it was just someone driving the same route. But something felt off. The lights never blinked or flashed, never dipped or brightened. They stayed locked on me like a predator. I glanced into the rearview mirror. The car behind was a dark, older model sedan, not the type you saw every day. The paint was dull, and the windows seemed tinted so heavily I couldn't see inside. The car was keeping pace but never attempted to pass. My heart started to beat faster. I tapped my brakes gently to see if it would pass. Instead, the car slowed down too, matching my speed. I sped up a little. The car sped up. The highway was empty. No other cars around for miles. My pulse quickened. I reached down to the radio, turning it on. Static. No stations picked up. I told myself to relax. Maybe it was someone lost, maybe a police car or a trucker. I drove on, following the road as it curved through the empty landscape. The car stayed behind me, relentless. Suddenly, the headlights flickered, once, twice, then went out. My stomach dropped. I slowed down to a stop at the side of the road, heart hammering in my chest. I looked in the mirror. Nothing. No headlights. No car. I waited a few seconds, then got back into the car and locked the doors. The radio still only hissed static. I started driving again, eyes scanning the horizon. Then up ahead, the headlights flickered back on, brighter than before, illuminating the desert landscape in an eerie glow. A chill ran through me. I pressed the accelerator, desperate to lose whatever it was, but the car kept pace, tailing me closely. A mile later, I saw a rest stop. I pulled in quickly and slammed the car into park. The car behind did the same. I didn't want to get out, but I needed help. I grabbed my phone again. No signal. I looked into the side mirror. The car's headlights suddenly turned off again, and I could see a shadow moving near the rear of my car. My breath caught. The door handle rattled. I yanked the door lock button. The handle stopped. I sat frozen, watching the darkness outside, feeling like prey. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually, the car's engine roared to life, the headlights blinked back on, and it sped away down the highway. I waited a long time before I dared start the engine and leave. The rest of the drive, I kept glancing behind me. The highway was empty. Weeks later, I researched the route. There had been several accidents over the years. Drivers swearing they were followed by a phantom car with no driver, lights that appeared and disappeared, sounds that weren't human. I never took that route again. But sometimes when I drive at night on empty highways, I catch a glimpse of lights behind me. Steady, relentless, waiting. Story the end. The night was bitter cold and mercilessly dark when Tom pulled onto the stretch of rural highway outside of Spokane, Washington. He had just wrapped up a late shift at the warehouse, hauling shipments for a local distributor. The day had been long, and the clock blinked 11:36 p.m. on the dashboard clock as he accelerated onto the empty two-lane road that cut through thick forests and rolling hills. The faint hum of the radio was his only companion in the cab of his aging Chevy Silverado. This route was the fastest way home, but notorious for its isolation. No gas stations for miles, no towns, just forest and blacktop. Cell service was spotty, so Tom didn't expect to be able to call for help if anything went wrong. His wife had reminded him before he left, "Be careful out there. The road's treacherous at night." Tom grunted in response and shifted the truck into fifth gear, letting the engine growl as he pressed the accelerator. The truck's headlights carved out a tunnel of light into the darkness, illuminating a few yards ahead, then nothing but shadows and trees. The temperature dropped rapidly, and Tom pulled his jacket tighter, shivering as he watched his breath curl in the cold air. The radio sputtered with static, then a classic rock station came through. It was faint, but better than silence. He cranked up the volume, hoping it'd keep his eyes open. The road stretched before him, straight for a while, then winding between giant pines and firs that cast long, eerie shadows. About 30 minutes into the drive, Tom saw something ahead on the side of the road, a figure standing on the shoulder. It It was too dark to make out much, but the shape was unmistakably human. He slowed down to get a better look, his pulse quickening. The figure stood completely still, facing away from the road, almost blending into the shadows. "Hey, you okay?" Tom called out, rolling his window down a crack. No response. He slowed even more, instinct telling him to stop and offer help. The figure didn't move, didn't turn. Tom's unease grew. As he passed, the figure turned abruptly, revealing a pale, gaunt face with eyes that reflected the truck's headlights like dull, empty orbs. The lips were slightly parted in a way that looked unnatural, almost as if the mouth was frozen mid-speech. Tom's heart slammed in his chest. He floored the gas and pulled back into the lane, putting distance between himself and the figure. A sudden gust of wind rattled the truck, and the radio sputtered into a burst of static. The volume dropped to 0. Tom flipped the switch to turn it off, shaking off a rising cold dread. Further down the road, the sky darkened unnaturally, a low fog beginning to settle on the pavement. It wrapped around the truck like a thick, choking blanket, swallowing the trees, the signs, even the distant glow of the moon. Tom slowed again, the beam of his headlights barely penetrating the mist. Then, out of nowhere, a shape appeared directly in the middle of the road. He slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop mere feet from the figure. It was the same woman, dressed in white, her long hair matted and tangled. Her skin looked almost translucent in the fog, and her eyes were impossibly wide, fixed on Tom. He tried to roll down the window to speak, but the buttons didn't respond. The fog thickened and his vision blurred. The radio crackled back to life, but instead of music or static, it played a low, guttural whisper. "Go back!" The voice was not human. Fear gripped him, but Tom forced himself to start the truck and back up slowly. The figure didn't move, just stared as if waiting for him to leave. His heart thudded painfully in his chest as he gunned the engine and sped away, the fog parting just enough for him to see the road ahead. As he drove, the radio switched channels on its own, cycling through static and brief flashes of voices, some screaming, some crying, others eerily silent. The temperature inside the truck dropped, frost forming on the windows. Suddenly, the truck jolted violently, as if hitting something heavy. Tom slammed the brakes and pulled over to inspect. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The beam illuminated deep scratches along the driver's side door and hood. There was no sign of what could have caused them. Tom's hands trembled as he climbed back inside. The engine struggled to start, then roared to life. He sped off, not daring to look back. When he finally reached his driveway, 2 hours later, the sun was beginning to rise. The scratches were still there. He never spoke about the night to anyone. But sometimes late at night, when he's driving alone, Tom hears faint whispers in the static of his radio and sees a pale figure standing by the roadside, waiting. Story the end. The night I decided to drive home from Denver to Albuquerque, I told myself I'd keep it simple. Straight shot down I-25, no detours, no stops. I'd been visiting a friend, and the long weekend had stretched into late Sunday afternoon. I left just before sunset, hoping to make it back before midnight. The roads were quiet at first, the fading daylight slowly replaced by a deep twilight. About 2 hours into the trip, somewhere near Raton, New Mexico, the traffic thinned dramatically. The highway stretched endlessly, flanked by dark mountains that seemed to swallow the road whole. I was alone, save for the low hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of passing taillights. At first it felt peaceful, the kind of peace that comes with solitude and the promise of home. But as darkness fully settled, the highway seemed to stretch into an abyss. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS and noticed the signal flickering, bars dropping to none and then briefly back. The only thing connected now was the dashboard clock glowing an eerie green, 10:47 p.m. I figured I'd make it to Las Vegas, New Mexico in another hour, where I could stop for gas or grab a snack. But after a while, the road started to feel different, like it was too quiet. Not just the absence of cars, but the absence of anything. No radio stations, no trucks passing by, no blinking highway signs, just me and the empty highway. Then I saw them. At first, just a faint glimmer on the horizon behind me, 2 lights, steady and white. I blinked, thinking maybe it was just a reflection or a distant car. But they stayed, closing in slowly as if tracking me. I glanced in the rearview mirror. A car was behind me, headlights bright and unblinking, but I couldn't make out the make or model. It was too dark, and the lights created a blur that seemed almost unreal. My pulse quickened. I've driven these roads countless times, and tailgaters were nothing new, but this felt different. The car was persistent, steady, never speeding up or slowing down. It stayed exactly the same distance from me, no matter how I adjusted my speed. I tapped my brakes lightly, expecting it to slow or pass. Instead, the lights dimmed just slightly and then brightened again. No passing. I took the next exit onto a smaller highway, hoping to lose it. The car followed immediately. My hands clenched the steering wheel tighter. I thought about calling 911, but my phone was dead. No signal at all. I glanced at the gas gauge. It was half full. No chance of running out anytime soon, but I realized I wasn't thinking about fuel. I was thinking about what was following me. The next town was a tiny speck on the map, barely more than a few houses and an old gas station. I pulled into the station and flicked my hazards on, heart pounding. The car pulled in behind me, lights still shining bright. I watched as a figure stepped out, but the streetlights flickered, and the figure seemed to fade in and out, like a glitch in reality. I shut the door, locked it, and tried the handle to make sure it was secure. I sat in the car, breathing heavily, eyes glued to the windows. The figure stood at the edge of the pump, motionless, watching me. I reached for the keys, ready to drive away, but before I could, the figure spoke. "Don't run," it said, voice soft, distant, like an echo from a cave. I froze. "Why?" I asked, voice trembling. "Because you're not ready." The words chilled me deeper than the cold night air. I slammed the door and locked it again, fumbling for my phone to turn on the flashlight. The screen lit up, but the signal was gone. The figure moved closer, steps slow, deliberate, but the streetlights flickered again and the shadow became just a blur. My mind raced. Was this a hallucination? Some kind of trick? But the fear was real. I started the car and backed out of the pump, tires screeching slightly on the gravel. The figure didn't move. I sped onto the highway, heart in my throat. The headlights appeared behind me again, closer this time, but something was different. The lights flickered, dimmed, then suddenly turned off. For a moment, I thought it was gone. Then, out of nowhere, my engine sputtered and died. The dashboard went dark. I coasted to the shoulder, the car's silence deafening. I tried the ignition again, but nothing. No clicking, no hum, just dead. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my phone, but still no signal. I looked behind me. The headlights flickered back on, closer now, illuminating the night like a searchlight. I locked the doors and pulled my knees up to my chest. The figure appeared again at the window, but this time clearer. An old man with hollow eyes, skin pale and stretched tight over his face. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. The car's radio suddenly crackled to life, static at first, then a voice, distorted and warped. "You shouldn't be here." I slammed my hands against the steering wheel. "Leave me alone." The figure pressed a hand against the window. Cold seeped through the glass. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the lights went off. The radio died. The car started again, the engine roaring back to life. I didn't look back. I drove the rest of the way home, never stopping, never slowing. I never saw that car again, but sometimes at night when I'm driving alone, I swear I catch a glimpse of headlights in the mirror, lights that don't belong to any car I know. And I wonder, was it real, or just a ghost of the road warning me to stay off the highway after dark? Story the end. The road stretched on endlessly, a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dense darkness of the Missouri countryside. Mike's old pickup hummed steadily beneath him as he cruised along, the only illumination coming from his headlights slicing through the black night. He was driving back home from a late shift at the manufacturing plant in a nearby town, a little over 2 hours from his family farm. It was past midnight, and the rest of the world seemed to have fallen asleep. The radio played softly in the background, classic rock station, mostly static, punctuated by occasional bursts of music. Mike fiddled with the dial, trying to find a clearer channel, but the crackling persisted. He sighed and turned it off, craving only the sound of the engine and the tires against the road. It was the kind of night that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The air was still, the kind that presses against your skin like a weight. Mike had driven this stretch countless times, but tonight something felt different. He scanned the rearview mirror every few minutes, half expecting to see headlights behind him, but the road was empty. His mind drifted to his wife and 2 kids, asleep at home, their faces lighting up his phone screen with their last goodnight texts. He smiled softly and promised himself he'd be home soon. The miles ticked by steadily. About an hour into his drive, Mike noticed a car parked on the side of the road ahead. It was an old, rusty sedan with the driver's side door wide open. No lights on, no hazard blinkers. The dark figure of a man stood beside it, facing the ditch. Mike slowed down instinctively. As he passed, the man glanced up, and Mike caught a glimpse of his face. Pale and gaunt, eyes wide and glassy like a deer caught in headlights. Something wasn't right. "Need help?" Mike called out as he rolled his window down slightly. No answer. Mike glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the man wave or approach his truck, but the figure remained frozen. The door of the sedan slammed shut with a dull thud, and when Mike looked again, the car was gone. His heart skipped a beat. He rubbed his eyes and blinked hard, thinking he must be imagining things. He shook his head and accelerated, telling himself to focus on the road. Just then, his headlights illuminated a road sign that said, "Blue Hollow, next 5 miles." Mike hadn't heard of Blue Hollow before. He'd never seen the sign here on his usual routes, and he didn't remember passing this road. Curious but cautious, he kept driving. The fog started rolling in, thick and white, blanketing the road ahead and muffling sound. Mike turned on his low beams and slowed down. The fog clung to the trees lining the highway like creeping ghosts. He reached a fork in the road where the Blue Hollow road split off from the main highway. The asphalt on the side road was cracked and covered with leaves. For some reason, the place looked inviting, though eerie. Then, a shadow flickered at the edge of the fog, a woman's silhouette standing still at the side of the road. Mike blinked and looked again, but she was gone. He frowned, gripping the wheel tightly. The hairs on his arms rose. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life with a burst of static, and faint whispers could be heard beneath it, like voices murmuring in an unknown language. He reached for the dial, but the radio began to blare loudly, a piercing, high-pitched noise that sent a sharp pain through his ears. He slammed his hand down and switched it off, breathing hard. The truck's engine sputtered once, then roared back to life. Mike exhaled, relieved, but a cold chill ran down his spine. He glanced into the passenger seat and saw, to his horror, a pair of muddy boots resting there. No one was sitting beside him, yet the boots were clearly not his. He froze, heart pounding. Suddenly, the boots disappeared. His eyes darted to the back window. Something moved there. A shadow shifted quickly out of sight. Mike slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt. He looked around frantically, but found no one. Just the fog, the dark trees, and the endless silence. He considered calling someone, but realized his phone was dead. No signal, and no battery. Panic crept in. He decided to keep driving, but the road twisted and turned unnaturally, as if the landscape itself was changing. At one point, he thought he saw a small, dilapidated farmhouse with its windows glowing faintly. He pulled over to investigate, hoping to find help or at least a phone to call for assistance. But when he approached, the house was completely dark and empty. The front door creaked open on its own, revealing an old, dusty hallway with peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. A faint smell of decay lingered in the air. Mike stepped inside, heart hammering. He called out, "Hello." No answer. His footsteps echoed as he moved deeper inside. On a table in the corner lay a rusted pocket watch, stopped at 3:33 a.m. Suddenly a cold breeze swept through the house, and a whisper brushed his ear. "Leave." Mike bolted out the door and back to his truck. As he started the engine, the radio crackled again, this time clearer. A woman's voice whispered, "Don't look back." He obeyed. The fog had thickened, so thick it swallowed his headlights. Then, out of nowhere, the truck lurched as if something had slammed into the side. Mike swerved hard to the right, tires skidding on loose gravel. The truck spun briefly before coming to a stop facing the wrong direction. He looked outside, nothing there. Desperately, he tried to start the engine again. It turned over slowly but wouldn't catch. He heard footsteps around the truck, slow and deliberate. His heart pounded so loud he was sure they could hear it. Then a voice, a man's voice, low and gruff, called out from the darkness. "You shouldn't be here." Mike scrambled into the cab, locked the doors, and tried to start the engine again. This time, it caught. He floored the gas pedal, peeling out into the fog, tires spinning on wet pavement. Behind him, a silhouette appeared briefly at the edge of the fog, a man, tall and shadowy, standing perfectly still. Mike didn't stop driving until the fog thinned and dawn's light began to creep over the horizon. When he finally made it to a gas station at the next town, he pulled over, shaking. He asked the clerk about Blue Hollow. Blue Hollow? That road's been closed for years, the clerk said, eyes wide. Some say it's cursed. People go down there and don't come back. Mike left the gas station, his hands still trembling. He glanced back at the highway and noticed something strange. The odometer on his truck showed he'd driven nearly 100 miles longer than usual. How could that be? He swore he'd been on that stretch for less than an hour. He looked down at his phone, which suddenly had full bars and notifications he hadn't seen before. Among them was a message from an unknown number. Next time, don't stop. Mike deleted the message and started the truck. He didn't take Blue Hollow again. But every night, when he drives home late, he can't shake the feeling that something is watching him from the edge of the road, waiting in the fog, ready to appear again. Story the end. The night had settled deep and thick over rural Pennsylvania when I set out from my friend's place in State College. It was late, well past midnight, and I was headed back home to a small town near Pittsburgh. I had promised myself I wouldn't drive after dark, especially through the stretches of country road that cut through dense forest and barely had any traffic. But the night had gotten away from me. The conversation had been good, the beers cold, and suddenly it was 12:30 a.m. My phone's battery was below 20%, so I didn't want to stop and plug it in just yet. The highway was mostly empty when I hit the road, the kind of quiet that wraps around you and almost makes you feel alone even though you're still inside your car. The radio was low, some classic rock station with a weak signal that crackled just enough to keep me company. I was tired, but the thought of home kept me going. After about an hour on the highway, I took the exit toward my town, Route 711, a narrow, winding two-lane road that cuts through miles of forest, farms, and the occasional small town. The road was lined with towering pines and oaks that made the night darker than it already was. My headlights carved out a cone of light, but everything beyond that was thick shadow. The first odd thing happened about 20 minutes into this stretch. I noticed a car behind me, tailing a bit too closely. It wasn't unusual for someone to pass me on these roads, but this car stayed behind me for miles without trying to pass. I caught a glimpse, a dark-colored sedan with tinted windows. No headlights flashing to signal a pass, no attempt to overtake, just following. I glanced in the rearview mirror a few times, but the driver's face was obscured. At one point, the car seemed to slow down when I slowed and speed up when I did. It felt intentional. My heart rate picked up. I wanted to pull over to a gas station or convenience store and wait it out, but the next town was miles away and nothing was open at this hour. About 10 minutes later, I saw a curve up ahead. I slowed to 35 miles per hour, and the car behind me did the same. As I took the turn, I caught a flicker in the mirror, something white inside that car. A person, maybe, but it was hard to tell. The whole thing was unsettling. I thought about calling the police, but my phone was almost dead, and I wasn't sure if I'd have signal out here. I also debated speeding up to lose them, but was worried that might provoke whoever it was. Then the headlights suddenly went out. 1 second the sedan was right there behind me, and then the lights disappeared completely. I was left with nothing but the yellow line in front and the quiet hum of my engine. I glanced back nervously a few times. No lights. No sign of the car. The silence was unnerving. I kept driving, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence, or maybe the driver had pulled off. But when I reached the next straightaway, I saw the sedan parked on the shoulder about 100 yards back. The car was sitting there with no lights, engine off. Something felt wrong. As I passed it, I noticed the driver's side door was slightly ajar. No one was around. I didn't slow down. My stomach twisted into knots. I pressed the accelerator a little harder and kept my eyes glued to the road. I was about halfway home when my headlights briefly illuminated something in the middle of the road. It looked like a figure, small and crouched. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the gravelly shoulder, but when I stopped, there was nothing there. No animal. No person. Just the empty road stretching ahead. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel. I debated turning around, but knew I'd never make it back without running into the sedan again. The rest of the drive was tense. I kept seeing shadows dart at the edge of my headlights. At one point, I swear I caught a glimpse of the figure from before standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. The moment I pulled into my driveway, I locked the doors, grabbed my phone charger, and went straight inside. I didn't look back. The next morning, I called the local police to report the strange car and the open door. They said they'd send a patrol to check the area, but warned me that it was a common spot for car break-ins and abandoned vehicles. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that night. A week later, I checked local news online and found an article about a string of assaults on late-night drivers on that very road. Several victims had reported being followed by a black sedan, their windows tinted so dark it was impossible to see inside. One case stood out. A woman who had stopped to help a stranded driver only to find the man inside the car was missing when she approached, and no one had been around. The last line of the article sent chills down my spine. Authorities warned drivers to avoid the stretch between Route 119 and New Salem Road after dark. I've never driven that road at night again. Story the end. The night was unusually still as Josh Daniels pulled out of the gas station on Route 50, somewhere between Carson City and Lake Tahoe. The sky was clear, the stars bright, but the highway ahead was desolate. Nothing but miles of twisting asphalt flanked by towering pines and dark mountain shadows. He had started his drive late, after wrapping up a last-minute client meeting in Reno that ran longer than expected. Now, with no other cars in sight, he was alone in the glow of his headlights, winding through the Nevada wilderness. Josh was no stranger to late-night drives. As a traveling IT consultant, overnight routes were part of the job. Usually he found solace in the quiet, the hum of his sedan's engine, and the endless road ahead. But tonight felt different. He couldn't shake a gnawing unease that had settled into his chest since the gas station stop. His phone's battery was dangerously low, and the signal had already vanished miles back. He thought about pulling over to charge it, but no rest stops or towns were coming up on the GPS. Besides, he felt an inexplicable urge to keep moving, to get through the stretch as fast as he could. About 20 minutes in, as the highway curved sharply around a bend, Josh caught sight of something in his peripheral vision. A figure standing at the edge of the road, barely illuminated by his headlights. His heart skipped a beat. It looked like a man, wearing a dark hoodie, hands stuffed into pockets, staring at the road as if waiting for something, or someone. Josh instinctively slowed down but didn't stop. The man didn't move as the car passed by. A sudden flicker of headlights from behind revealed a pickup truck trailing him closely, its high beams glaring. The truck's driver seemed to be watching the figure as well. Josh checked his mirrors. The pickup kept a steady distance but wasn't overtaking. He considered pulling over to let it pass, but the road ahead was narrow, winding, and surrounded by dense forest. No safe shoulder to stop on. Minutes later, the figure appeared again, this time on the opposite side of the highway. Josh blinked and tried to rationalize what he'd seen. Could it be someone stranded? A hitchhiker? But there was no town or turnout for miles. His mind raced with memories of local news stories he'd read about disappearances and unexplained sightings along this route. He told himself to stop thinking like that. He wasn't superstitious. Then, his radio crackled unexpectedly, breaking the silence. Static filled the cabin, then a faint, garbled voice. Josh tried to tune the dial, but the voice persisted for a few seconds before fading out. He shook his head, blaming the mountainous terrain for the interference. The road dipped into a narrow gorge, and the trees seemed to close in tighter on both sides. Suddenly, his headlights caught a flash of white on the shoulder ahead. Josh slammed the brakes, heart pounding. There, lying face down in the dirt, was a woman. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled with pine needles. She didn't move. Josh threw the car into park, grabbed his jacket, and stepped out into the cold night air. The silence was oppressive, broken only by his footsteps crunching on gravel. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady. She groaned faintly when he touched her shoulder. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked urgently. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were wide and glassy, unfocused. I don't know where I am," she whispered. Josh looked around, hoping to see signs of a nearby residence or passing cars, but the road was empty, shrouded in darkness. He took out his phone, but the battery icon blinked red, and there was still no signal. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded weakly. Helping her up, Josh guided her to the car's passenger seat and buckled her in. "We'll get you somewhere safe," he promised, though the nearest town was still miles away. As he climbed back into the driver's seat, he glanced back at the woman. She stared ahead, silent and still. Josh started the engine and eased back onto the highway. The pickup truck that had been behind him was nowhere in sight. Minutes passed with only the sound of tires on asphalt and the woman's quiet breathing. Suddenly, the headlights caught something up ahead. A car, parked on the side, doors wide open. No lights inside, no signs of movement. Josh's stomach churned. This wasn't normal. He slowed to a stop a safe distance away, heart hammering. The woman in the passenger seat suddenly tensed. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Josh nodded. "Yeah. Should we check it out?" Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. The screen lit up with a single message. "Don't stop." His breath caught. He glanced at the woman. Her eyes were fixed on the abandoned car, but her face was pale, almost translucent. "Who sent that?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Josh replied. "But I don't like it." He hit the gas and sped past the car, leaving it behind in the darkness. The road narrowed even more, twisting sharply through the forest. Josh's grip on the wheel tightened as the feeling of being watched crept over him again. His headlights flickered once, twice. The woman suddenly reached over and grabbed his arm. "Turn here," she said, pointing toward a barely visible dirt road. Josh hesitated, but swerved onto the dirt path, tires skidding slightly. The pickup truck reappeared behind them, its headlights glaring bright, closing the distance fast. Josh slammed on the brakes, and the truck stopped abruptly behind. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw the silhouette of a man getting out of the truck. Tall, broad-shouldered, but face hidden by shadows. "Stay here," Josh said urgently to the woman. He unlocked his door and stepped out into the gravel. The cold air hit him hard, and the night seemed to grow even quieter. The man approached slowly, hands visible and raised. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, voice low and gravelly. Josh nodded, trying to steady his shaking hands. "Did you see her? The woman on the road?" The man's eyes darkened. "Yeah, she's been here for years." Josh swallowed. "What do you mean?" The man sighed and gestured toward the forest. "They say she was a hitchhiker who vanished in these woods a decade ago. Drivers keep seeing her, especially at night. She's trapped, and she's dangerous." Josh's heart pounded. "Dangerous how?" The man's voice dropped. "She's been blamed for several crashes. People who stop for her never come back the same." Josh shivered. "Listen," the man continued, "I'm the local deputy. Been chasing this story for years. If you see her again, don't stop. Just keep driving. Whatever you do, don't look back." Josh glanced at the woman in his car. She was asleep now, peaceful and unaware. "Thanks," Josh said. The deputy nodded and climbed back into his truck, leaving Josh alone once more. He started his car and peeled back onto the highway, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. For the next hour, Josh didn't dare slow down. The woman never stirred. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, he reached the edge of town. He stopped at the first cafe and called his office to explain the delay. Later, when he returned to check on the woman, the passenger seat was empty. There was no sign she had ever been there. Josh left the cafe shaken, vowing never to drive Route 50 at night again. The desert sun rose higher, but in the back of his mind, the woman's hollow eyes haunted him. He could still see them every time he closed his own. Story the end. It was just after midnight when I started the drive home from a late work shift in rural Virginia. The sky was clear, but black as ink, and the road stretched out before me like a ribbon disappearing into the woods on both sides. I was tired. That deep, bone-weary kind of tired that comes after standing on your feet for 12 hours, but I was determined to make the 5-hour drive without stopping. I told myself I'd be fine. The first couple of hours were uneventful. The highway was nearly empty, just the occasional set of headlights far in the distance. The familiar sound of my tires rolling on asphalt and the drone of the engine were steady companions. I played some music quietly, but mostly kept the radio off, enjoying the solitude and darkness. Around 2 a.m., I hit a particularly remote stretch of highway with thick forest on either side. The trees leaned over the road, creating long shadows in the beams of my headlights. It was the kind of place that felt miles away from civilization, and honestly, it gave me the creeps, even though I had driven this road a dozen times before. Suddenly, my headlights caught something moving just at the edge of the tree line. A figure, a man, stood still, watching the road. He was wearing a faded jacket and jeans, his face barely visible in the pale moonlight filtering through the branches. I instinctively slowed down, expecting him to step back, but he didn't move. He just stared. As I got closer, I realized something was off. His posture was too stiff, too unnatural. Then, just as I passed him, he suddenly disappeared. Not walked off into the woods, vanished outright. My heart skipped. I blinked, looked again, but the spot was empty. I shook my head and pressed on. A few miles later, I saw another figure. This one was sitting on the guardrail beside a narrow bridge, legs dangling over the side. I slowed down and glanced, but as I passed, the figure twisted sharply, turning toward me. The face was gaunt, eyes sunken, and mouth hanging open in a silent scream. I slammed the accelerator and didn't look back. The radio crackled, then went dead. I tried to restart it, but the whole dash flickered. My headlights dimmed briefly, then brightened again. The car felt heavier, like the engine was struggling against some unseen force. I gripped the steering wheel tight, muscles tense. The trees seemed to close in. I was driving through a tunnel of darkness. I noticed the mileage markers and road signs had disappeared. No exit numbers, no town signs, just the road ahead and the black forest pressing in. I pulled out my phone to check GPS. No signal. I wasn't surprised. This part of the highway was notorious for dead zones, but it added to my unease. Then I heard the whispering. Soft at first, like wind through the trees, but then growing clearer. Don't stop. Don't stop. I told myself it was my imagination. Stress. Exhaustion. But the voice grew louder. I glanced to my right and saw something moving between the trees. Another figure, this one a woman. She wore a white dress, stained and torn. Her hair hung in matted strands. Her eyes were wide and empty. She stepped onto the road. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. She stopped inches from my front bumper. I sat frozen, heart hammering. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She pointed ahead. I looked up and saw a broken-down truck blocking the road. No way around it. I tried the horn, but it was silent. I tried to start the engine. Dead. Panic washed over me. I looked back to the woman. She smiled slowly, an expression of terrible sorrow. Then the whispering voices surrounded the car. Chants in a language I couldn't understand. The air grew cold. The engine roared to life suddenly, startling me. I floored the gas and tore past the truck. The woman was gone. The whispering stopped. I sped away as fast as I could, heart pounding, eyes wide. Eventually, I reached a gas station where I stopped to gather myself. The clerk was an older man, quiet but kind. I asked him about the stretch of road I'd just driven. His face grew serious. "That's Hollow Pass," he said quietly. "Why do you call it that?" I asked. "Because a lot of people go through it, but some don't come out the same." "Niste," he replied. He told me stories of travelers who vanished or came back changed, claiming they saw people who weren't there, who whispered warnings and haunted the night. I thanked him and left, still shaken. Since then, I avoid driving that road at night. Sometimes I still hear the whispering in my dreams, and sometimes, just on the edge of my vision, I swear I see those empty eyes watching from the trees. Story, the end. The rain was steady but light when Chris pulled out of the rest area on Interstate 70 in eastern Colorado. It was just past midnight. The highway slick and glistening under the yellow glow of the sporadic streetlights. The air smelled like wet asphalt and pine, cold enough that the heat inside his 2005 Ford F-150 was turned up to chase the chill out. Chris had been on the road all day, this hauling supplies back to Denver after a delivery in a small town near the Kansas border. His schedule was tight, but he liked the late-night drives, the quiet roads, the absence of traffic, and the solitude that came with it. Tonight, though, that solitude felt more like isolation. Chris's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of trees and the occasional reflective highway sign. The radio was off. It had started to crackle earlier, so he turned it down, preferring the sound of rain tapping on the windshield. His eyes were tired, but he fought to stay alert. Every so often, a semi-truck would thunder past him, its massive tires splashing water onto the shoulder. Beyond that, the road was empty. At mile marker 200, Chris spotted a figure standing on the shoulder ahead, just beyond the guardrail. At first, he thought it was a stranded driver, maybe waiting for help. The figure was a man in a dark jacket and jeans, his head bowed against the rain. Chris slowed, slowing more than usual, and blinked, trying to get a better look. The man didn't move. Chris debated whether to pull over, but the spot was narrow and the rain was picking up. Something about the man's posture unsettled him. He seemed almost frozen in place. Chris shook his head and kept going, his foot pressing a little harder on the gas. A mile or so later, the headlights caught another figure. This time, a woman, standing on the median strip between the eastbound and westbound lanes. Her long hair hung wet, and she wore a white dress that clung to her frame. She faced the westbound lanes, so she didn't see Chris's truck until he was almost upon her. He honked, but she didn't react. Chris jerked the wheel to the right, nearly skidding on the wet asphalt. The woman vanished. His heart pounded. He pulled into a rest stop to catch his breath and check his phone. No service. The little signal bar in the corner blinked with a slash through it. He sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, watching the rain streak down the windshield. The digital clock read 12:45 a.m. When he got back on the road, the highway stretched endlessly through the dark, empty landscape. No more figures appeared, but the unease didn't fade. At mile marker 210, Chris's headlights illuminated a rusty sign on the right side of the road that read, Cedar Hollow. The name felt familiar, like something he'd read in local legends. A knot tightened in his stomach. Around the next bend, the rain stopped suddenly. The windshield went quiet except for the occasional drip from the trees above. Chris pulled over briefly to wipe the fog off the inside of the glass, and that's when he noticed the strange stillness. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. It was as if the world had paused. He glanced back down the road and saw a vehicle parked on the shoulder. An old pickup, white and dented with no lights on. The driver's door was slightly open. Chris's breath caught. Before he could react, a sudden movement caught his eye from the rearview mirror. A shadow flickering just behind the truck. He spun the wheel, almost losing control, but the truck remained steady. "Hello?" he called out, his voice tight. No answer. Chris's hands shook as he started the engine again. As he pulled away, a voice whispered in his ear, soft and distant, "Don't stop." His pulse raced as he looked around the cab, but no one was there. The radio suddenly crackled back to life, playing an old country song. Chris hit the power button, but the static remained, and the voice whispered again, barely audible, "Keep moving." The truck's headlights dimmed, and the digital clock flickered erratically. The GPS, which had been working fine, now showed his position deep inside a thick forest with no road. Panic rising, Chris gripped the wheel tightly and pressed on. The trees closed in, branches scraping the sides of the truck. Then, out of nowhere, the headlights illuminated a figure standing directly in the middle of the road. It was a man, face pale and soaked, eyes black and unblinking. His mouth opened slowly, and Chris heard the words clear as day, "You don't belong here." Chris swerved hard to the left and hit the shoulder, the truck skidding on wet leaves. He slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. When he looked back, the figure was gone, but the feeling didn't leave. For the next few miles, Chris's headlights flickered on and off, and every time they came back, another figure appeared. A woman in a red coat, a child clutching a doll, a man with a broken arm. All pale, all silent. The last one was standing at the edge of the woods, his face twisted in a scream that had no sound. Chris's phone buzzed again. This time, a message from an unknown number, "Get off the road." He didn't respond. At mile marker 225, the truck finally coughed and died. Chris tried to restart it, but nothing happened. The radio static grew louder, the whispering voices overlapping in a cacophony. The temperature dropped sharply, and his breath steamed in the cold air. Then, footsteps in the wet leaves outside the door. Chris turned slowly. A shadow moved in the tree line, then another, and another. They were coming. His hands trembling, Chris fumbled for the door handle. Suddenly, the passenger window shattered inward, glass spraying everywhere. A cold hand gripped his wrist. He screamed. The world went black. Chris woke up hours later on the shoulder of the interstate, soaked and shivering, the truck idling beside him. No damage, no broken window. His phone showed full signal. The radio was silent. He drove the rest of the way home, never taking that stretch of road again. Every time he passes mile marker 210, he feels a chill and a whisper in the wind. Don't stop. Story the end. The summer of 2019 was supposed to be the start of something new for me. I'd just finished my last semester at college in Austin and had landed a job in Phoenix. Moving out west was exciting. New city, new job, new life. The plan was to drive my old 2008 Ford Focus across Texas and New Mexico into Arizona and settle in. I left Austin early afternoon on a Friday, with the sun still warm on my skin. The highway was crowded with other weekend travelers, and I cruised along I-10, feeling that restless excitement that comes with a big change. I told my parents I'd check in as soon as I made it to El Paso that night. It was roughly a 10-hour drive, and I wanted to break it up into manageable chunks. About halfway through the trip, around 9:30 p.m., I passed through Sonora, Texas. The sky had faded from deep blue to black, and the bright stars were starting to prick through the darkness. I had a full tank, snacks, and a playlist loaded up on my phone. The stretch from Sonora to El Paso was mostly desolate, long stretches of highway with little traffic, occasional oil rigs flickering orange lights in the distance, and desert mountains silhouetted against the night. I'd been driving steadily for hours, eyes getting heavy, but I kept pushing myself. I wanted to reach El Paso before midnight to get a hotel and rest. I figured a quick stop there would do the trick, and then I'd continue early the next morning. Just past a small exit labeled Iran, the headlights behind me flickered into view. At first, I thought it was just a car catching up. The highway was empty, so any traffic was obvious. The lights stayed behind me, steady and constant, not closing the gap. I glanced in the rearview mirror to see an older model white pickup truck. It was nothing out of the ordinary. I assumed the driver was just sticking close behind this, maybe to avoid the wind. I wasn't concerned at first, but after about 15 minutes of driving, the truck was still there, still not passing me, just following. I blinked hard, trying to shake the creeping unease. It was Texas, after all. Big roads, lots of night drivers. Probably a long-haul trucker or someone on their way home. Then I noticed something off. The truck's headlights didn't flicker or vary like normal headlights do on a bumpy road. They were almost too steady and too bright, like beams that didn't react to the terrain. I tried turning my music louder, singing along to distract myself, but my eyes kept darting back to the mirror. I passed a blinking yellow sign that said, "Next gas 50 miles." My heart sank a bit. The gas gauge was dipping toward half, but I'd need to keep an eye on it. No way was I stopping on this stretch if I could avoid it. As I drove, the truck stayed behind me, its white cab reflecting the yellow lines on the highway. I slowed a little, hoping it would pass, but it just matched my speed. Then I noticed that the taillights, two little red dots beneath the headlights, were missing. There was no red glow at all, only the bright, white headlights aimed straight at me. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was imagining things. I glanced at the speedometer, 70 miles per hour. I tapped the brakes lightly. The truck's lights dimmed slightly, like someone had a dimmer switch. A chill ran down my spine. I made a snap decision. I would pull off the highway at the next exit and let the truck pass. I flicked on my right signal and slowed down gently. The truck slowed with me. The exit ramp curved down to a small deserted area. No gas stations, no buildings, just a cracked asphalt turnout surrounded by scrub and desert bushes. I pulled in and stopped. The truck did the same, but this time the headlights were off. I stared at the side mirror. No movement inside the truck. I looked in the rearview mirror, trying to see the driver, but the cab was empty. No driver, no headlights, just that blinding white light shining from nowhere. I tried to shake off the panic creeping in. Maybe the driver was fiddling with the lights. Maybe the truck was broken. Maybe someone was playing a prank. I reached for my phone to call my parents. No signal. I considered calling 911, but I told myself I wasn't in danger. Just a weird, isolated stretch of road. I sat for a minute trying to calm down. Then, without warning, the truck's headlights snapped back on. The engine roared to life with a guttural growl, too loud for such an old vehicle. It shot forward toward the exit ramp, almost bumping the back of my car. I panicked and slammed my foot on the gas, speeding back onto the highway. The truck followed. Faster now. My heart was pounding, adrenaline surging. I pushed the Focus to 85 miles per hour, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The truck stayed on my tail. Then, without any warning, it swerved into the median and disappeared. I exhaled slowly, trying to process what just happened. A few miles later, I pulled into the first gas station in Pecos, Texas. I sat in the parking lot for a while, trying to shake the image from my mind. The truck, the empty cab, the blinding white lights. A worker came out asking if I needed help. I just said, "No, thanks." I got back on the highway, my nerves still raw. About 20 minutes later, a car pulled up next to me. It was an older man, maybe in his 60s, driving a silver sedan. He motioned for me to roll down my window. I lowered it cautiously. "Everything all right?" he asked, voice calm but concerned. I told him about the truck. He nodded knowingly. "You're lucky. That stretch has been cursed for decades," he said. "Cursed?" I asked, skeptical but curious. He shrugged. "People see trucks like that sometimes. Old rigs with no drivers. They say the drivers were lost souls who died on that road years ago, still trying to find their way home." I laughed nervously. He gave me a solemn look. "If you see it again, don't stop. Just keep driving. It won't harm you if you keep moving." I thanked him and drove off, feeling both relieved and unsettled. The rest of the trip passed without incident. When I finally reached Phoenix, I told a few friends the story. They looked at me like I was crazy. But the weirdest part? A month later, I looked up accidents on that stretch of highway. There had been a major crash in the 1970s involving an oil truck and a pickup. The driver of the pickup died instantly. Locals still talk about seeing his ghost truck, headlights glowing on empty highways, forever chasing a ride that will never come. I still drive at night sometimes, and every so often, when the road is empty and the silence is thick, I think I see those bright white lights in my rearview mirror. I don't stop. Story the end. It was a Wednesday night in late October when Kyle found himself driving down Highway 33, a stretch of road that ran through the Appalachian foothills of Virginia. The leaves had all but finished turning, and the wind had stripped most of them from the trees, leaving skeletal branches that scratched against his windshield in the occasional gust. The temperature had dropped sharply after sunset, and Kyle's breath fogged slightly on the inside of the window as he kept the heater on full blast. He was returning home after visiting a friend's place in a small town a few counties over, a drive of about 3 hours. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when he left the highway and took the narrow, winding county road that would lead him back to his family's farm. This road was infamous in the area for being quiet and isolated at night. Very few cars used it after dark, and cell service was spotty at best. Kyle's phone was plugged into the charger, but no bars showed on the screen. He tried a few times to get a signal, but the little no service icon stubbornly stayed put. The silence was almost absolute, except for the hum of the truck's engine and the occasional rustle of dry leaves blown by the wind. The road was twisting and narrow, the kind that demanded full attention, especially with the steep drop-offs on one side and thick woods on the other. Kyle was no stranger to this drive, having grown up in the area, but tonight the darkness seemed deeper, the shadows thicker. The moon was hidden behind heavy clouds, leaving the road in near total blackness, save for the glow of his headlights. As he crested a small hill, Kyle caught sight of something on the right shoulder. A figure standing motionless by the edge of the trees, half hidden in the darkness. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, but the figure's posture was odd, too stiff, almost unnatural. Kyle slowed down, instincts kicking in. "Hey!" he called out, lowering the window. "You need a ride?" The figure didn't move. Kyle's breath caught in his throat as he realized it was a woman, pale face, long dark hair hanging in front of her like a curtain. She wore a long white dress, dirt-smudged and torn. Her eyes glinted faintly in the beam of his headlights, wide and unblinking. Kyle's hand trembled on the steering wheel. The woman didn't say anything or even blink. Then, as he passed her, she slowly turned her head, her face tilting in a way that didn't look quite right, too sharp an angle, as if it twisted beyond what was humanly possible. A chill ran down Kyle's spine. He floored the gas and didn't look back. For the next several miles, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hair on his neck stood up, and every shadow seemed to flicker just out of the corner of his eye. The radio, which had been off, suddenly crackled to life. Static filled the cab of the truck. Then a faint voice whispered through the speakers. "Don't stop! Don't stop! Don't!" Kyle slammed the radio off, heart hammering. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. He pressed down on the gas, but as the road narrowed, he saw something strange up ahead. Another figure standing in the middle of the road, illuminated only by his headlights. This time, it was a man, older, wearing a dark coat and hat pulled low over his face. Kyle slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt a few feet from the man. The figure didn't move, just stood there. Kyle opened his mouth to call out, but was suddenly overwhelmed by an intense feeling of dread, like icy fingers squeezing his chest. The man lifted a hand slowly and pointed to the left, where the road split off into a dirt path leading into the forest. Without thinking, Kyle shifted into reverse and backed up, eyes darting between the road and the shadowy man. Then a loud bang sounded against the driver's side door. Kyle jerked his head around, but the man was gone. His breath came fast. He looked at the dashboard clock. It was now 12:13 a.m. His truck sputtered and died. Kyle's fingers fumbled over the keys, trying to restart it. The engine turned over once, twice, then silence. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the faintest sounds, whispers, footsteps crunching on dead leaves. He locked the doors and sat in the darkness, flashlight in hand. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in the rearview mirror, a flash of white, something slipping behind the truck. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down. The screen showed a text message from an unknown number. "Leave now." His hands shook as he hit reply. "Who is this?" No response. Suddenly, headlights appeared far down the road, growing brighter as a car approached. Relief flooded Kyle. He waved frantically, hoping the driver would see him and stop. The car slowed, then passed right by without so much as a glance. Kyle realized it wasn't slowing because it was avoiding him. It was avoiding the road itself, veering onto the dirt path to the left. Panic surged. The path the old man had pointed to, the one leading into the forest. Kyle's truck's engine roared to life again. He floored the gas and sped down the highway, the trees blurring past. The radio sputtered back on, this time with a voice clearer and closer. "Kyle! Kyle! Why won't you stop?" The voice was his own. He slammed the radio off and pressed the accelerator. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, but the road signs had vanished. The mile markers were gone. Everything was unfamiliar. The sky darkened. The fog thickened until visibility was near zero. Kyle gripped the wheel, eyes straining through the white haze. Then, out of the fog, the woman in the white dress appeared again, standing in the middle of the road, staring directly at him with hollow eyes. He swerved to avoid her, but the truck hit something hard. An animal? A fallen branch? The impact shook the truck, throwing Kyle against his seatbelt. He pulled over, heart racing. Outside, the fog clung to his skin like a damp shroud. Kyle looked around but saw nothing except the faint glow of his headlights cutting through the mist. He got back in, shaking. Suddenly, the radio burst back on, loud and clear. "This is Blue Hollow. You shouldn't have come." The voice was deep and cold. Kyle stared in horror. Blue Hollow was the name of the forest area the old man had indicated earlier. He had heard rumors growing up, stories about people getting lost there, disappearing for days or weeks. Some never returned. Kyle started the truck and gunned the engine. The fog began to lift slowly and the trees thinned out. He recognized the turnoff to the main highway up ahead. When he finally made it back to the highway and regained phone service, he called his wife. Her voice was calm but tired. "Where have you been?" she asked. "I don't know," he whispered. For days afterward, Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him. His dreams were haunted by whispers and dark figures. And sometimes, late at night, he thought he could hear a voice calling his name through the static of the radio. He never drove that road again. Story the end.